So today we're going to talk about someone called Herbert Marshall McLuhan, and we're going to watch a few videos talking about what did he really suspect about this electronic culture. So a little bit biography about Marshall McLuhan. So he was Canadian as well. He was born in Alberta. He started as, an engineer, then turned to study English and in particular poetry. This little thing about studying poetry is what actually made him very interested in oral culture. So again, remembering back with oral culture is how with poetry and music and rhythm, this was one of the main ways that people kept information. So he believed that poetry was a way of putting stories together. So he became really fascinated in early on with the way that print page transformed the verse. Again, imagine you are going to watch a speech or going to watch a play that has custom design, that has the way that people are talking, the emotions, the decorations of the stage, versus actually reading about this play in a book. Which one do you think will send you all of this emotions and feelings and the story more conveniently? Do you think it's going to be watching the play or reading the play? So when they are acting, you can actually see their emotions, you can see their faces, even the speech. Remember again in nonverbal communication, how they use their hand gestures, for example. But in a book, the printed page really transformed the way we can get a message, right? Now I want you to expand your horizon. Now, sending a letter back in the 40s or 50s or 60s. Sandeep, I'll get to you in just one second. Sending a letter, okay, that is again how the printed page transformed communication. You are in India and you're able to send a letter to your loved ones in Europe. Now letters, some people think it's more personalized. You can color in it, you can draw something. Some people, even when two lovers are apart, they send some letters, they could put a perfume on it and stuff like that. And then the transformation of the communication from printed to texting. Texting sometimes does not give, again, the varieties of emotions that I want to send, and that's why people excessively use emojis and gifs and stickers and stuff like that. Again, if you guys were able to compare watching a play and reading a play, what is the comparison between sending a letter and sending a text? What do you guys think how we receive them? All right, so basically what you guys have been all discussing was one of his concerns or one of his thoughts about it. So perhaps it was his ideas that really fueled all other later inquiries, such as Global Village, Telegram, television, and so on, which all centered around the socially transformation. We're talking about the social aspect of the way that we are transforming media forms. A little bit more about him. Again, he was taught in Catholic institutions, and then he joined the Roman Catholic University, and he was a full professor in 1952, where again he applied a lot of understandings and theories as a professor in that time. So Marshall had a vision of the future, or basically how it is all going to be interconnected. So he was the very first person to talk about global village. Have you heard about this term before, a global village? So he was the very first person to talk about a global village. He had this vision. Eventually, we are living in a global village. We know everything that's happening around the world, but unfortunately, he died before the internet came true, so he did not really see the internet, or like he did not witness the internet. He also wanted to clearly speak about the changes in communication technology that produce changes in the cultural, social, and the psychological order. So he wanted to really understand how technological communication gives changes in our culture. Remember when we were talking, I'll show you this. So we had what I like to call this one, collectivism, and on the other side we have individualism. So we can see that the more we progress in communication cultures. So here we're going to have oral cultures, writing, print, and then electronic culture. The more we progress, even those cultures changes. So again, oral cultures, and then writing, whoops, and print, and I'm going to put it here, and then finally electronic. So within even the progression of communication cultures and the progression of media and technology, it changes our culture. We were people thousands of years ago were in the same area simply because it was difficult to communicate with people across the globe. They did not have this luxury, they did not have this capacity. As time by time they moved from one place to the other, they developed writing techniques and then print, which caused people to get more and more independent and less interconnected with each other. So of course it changes our culture, it changes our social, even our social norms, our social looks, and so on, and of course even our psychological order. Psychological things like, again, when people are more interested in texting rather than receiving a phone call, or when we are attached to our smartphones all the time. Again, we are with our phones when we wake up, and we are with our phones when we go to bed. So all of these are changes in our psychological order. Now, McLuhan wrote a few books, and they're very important for you to understand. So not only some questions in the final exam will come from, but also they give you a good understanding of what he really meant by transforming our psychological order. So one of his first books is called The Mechanical Bride. All right, so it's a very critical work, and it dealt with popular culture, especially something like advertising. So in The Mechanical Bride, McLuhan takes up a critical analysis of what we call contemporary rhetorical practices in advertising and other media. He was interested in how the mass media enabled persuasion. Again, look at advertisement. How well the advertisement's motive most of the time is to persuade the audience to buy their product, whatever their product is. Think about soft drinks advertisements, think about smartphones advertisements, clothing or makeup, and so on. So he says here, the pressure set up around us today by the mechanical agencies of the press, radio, movies, and advertising. How you feel, again, pressured seeing media. You're in the SkyTrain, there's ad on the SkyTrain. You're watching a YouTube video, there's advertisement before the video that you're watching. And then you're watching something. You're watching a movie. Most of the time, the movie is going to have small ads in the middle, like what we call product placement. A product placement is it talks about how in movies there are some, sometimes you see sign of McDonald's in the background or someone drinking Pepsi. So these are all product placement. So he was very interested in how mass media enables persuasion. So this is one of your very important keywords in The Mechanical Bride. I'm going to write it in the chat room. The Mechanical Bride talks about persuasion. Is that the right? Yeah, right. So when he wrote this book, his main goal was to as a warning about the dangers of commercial persuasion, again, especially advertisement, all right? Some other work that McLuhan also talks about, so from 1953 to 1954, he directed a few seminars about, of course, culture and communication. And then he found a periodical with Edmund Carpenter called Explorations. We're going to get to this in a second. So McLuhan was increasingly called upon as actually a consultant to corporations and government for advertisements and for culture and for communication once his theories really began to become widely known. So he became, do you know what's a consultant? To ask like his expertise or his opinion upon a few things. Then the explorations in communications were designed to give seminar members a creative outlet. They then worked with an analogy, so it was first just a seminar for people to again, as a creative outlet, and then they published it in periodicals. Periodicals is like journals every 3 months or something like that. One of his theories, and he had a lot of theories. One of his theories that he believed as a new medium comes to prominence, and think about any medium that is new. Think about Zoom as a new medium. Think about smartphones. Think about laptops. One of its primary effects that it has on people and on culture is to extend some feature of this, our physical and psychical being in space and time. And I think we could definitely see that in Zoom. Again, we are defining space and time. So defining space because everyone is at their own home, at their own comfort, even with time. Some students, for example, would be in different countries all over the world. So even with time, different time zones, you can watch it. Even with recording the video and then uploading it, you can watch it later. So I am recording something, I'm keeping it for history. So again, you can look at this later. So take a look at, again, books, cameras, internet, smartphones. Think about, again, any medium. When it started to grow, what kind of effect did it have on people? Did it have on space? Did it have on time? And so on. Media, of course, are central to his analysis. And of course, he mentioned that they have a lot of important social and psychological implications. Again, not only on the people, but of course on smaller and individual level. He also believed that technologies alter the human bodies fundamentally. I like using smartphones in this statement. Believe that technologies alter the human body fundamentally. Your phone is now, or your smartphone is pretty much a part of you. You probably don't think you can leave your house without your smartphone. You cannot travel without your smartphone. You have to make sure that you pay the bills on time to keep your data running. Everything your phone carries are your credit cards, your numbers, your secrets, your passwords. Your phone knows a lot of you. What he means about alters the human body. Remember when we were talking about oral cultures and how people had good memory skills? Now we don't have a lot of good memory skills. Our memory really is starting to get more loose and loose because I don't really have to memorize things because I have it all on my smartphone. Same with spelling and grammar and language. People in the past were really good with language and grammar, but now I really don't have to because I have autocorrect on my phone. So again, it changes not only our mental state, but even it changes our physical body. You're attached to it all the time. Think about, how do you sleep with your phone? You sleep with it maybe under your pillow or beside you on the nightstand, or again, somewhere it's just close to you. when you're sleeping. Is that correct? Does someone ever leave, like, sleep with their smartphone outside of their room, for example? Some other books that are also important for you guys to know is the Gutenberg Galaxy, The Making of Typographic Man. It's considered one of his best works because, again, he talks about how print changed human development. So as you guys can tell so far, he's really interested in how communication cultures changes people, changes individuals, changes cultures, and it changes society. So he's really he's really interested about this. So in his book, he talks about theories about the effect of print in the human development. The book was more about, again, the social, again, and psychological effects of the movable type print. When you, like newspapers, books, magazines, you take it with you, and it's easy for travel. When you're traveling in an airplane, I don't know if they have it now. It's been the last time I traveled was a year ago, but for example, in Egyptian Airlines, they would give you newspapers for free. I don't know if you guys have seen that back home, or is it something that is common to give newspapers in an airplane? That it's a way from taking Egyptian news with you to some place, some other place. So that's, again, you're taking a movable type print across space. Again, space bias, right? McLuhan claimed that typographic culture restructured the world, again, and human consciousness. Think about how print really moved Europe from the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment era. People were more enlightened, and they had, again, more science, more art, more philosophers because of print, because the church was not in power anymore. So just one single invention really transformed everything else. You see, again, the printing press is a humankind's single most important invention because of, again, how it transformed a lot of things. Some other work is Understanding Media. So that's a book, The Extension of a Man. It represents his, again, a universally known work, means that this is one book that was translated into so many languages and it was across the world. It lays out his theories of media as developed over the course of exploration series. So remember when we talked about, there we go, exploration and communication. He puts them together in a book and he publishes them, and then he talks about how electronic media restructures civilization. Now, even though sometimes we say that electronic media breaks people apart and it keeps us more individualistic, at the same time, it's keeping people more connected. So that's a debate. A lot of people are debating. Is electronic media keeping us apart because of smartphones? Or smartphones and internet are helping people across the globe to stay connected? So some people are with, some people are against. So this is one of the most important theories you guys will get to know in this whole semester. And it's funny that we're putting it at the end of the semester. Has anyone heard about the statement, the medium is the message? Now, most of you, of course, know Harry Potter, for example, right? Think about Harry Potter as the book, okay? It's a medium and it contains some messages. And think about Harry Potter, the movies. That's a completely different medium. Now, do you think they could carry the exact 100% same message of different medium, a book and a movie? It just makes sense that it will not be the same. Now, again, when you're reading a book, again, something like Harry Potter, you're reading a book, the book could be this big, right? The book could contain a lot of details. It can contain a lot of conversations. I could try to describe the setting of the room. For example, I can describe the emotions of the characters in the book. But you're watching a movie and all of these details are simply in the camera. They are in the scene. So there's no description. of the setting of the living room, for example, but there's a scene of the decorations, there is sound effects, there are graphics. The conversation might not be as long in the book, there's no description of emotions because the actors are acting their emotions. So there's a lot of overlapping, but at the same time there's a lot of discrepancies. Again, the book would have so many details that the movie simply will not put because of budget or time and so on. Again, think about any other medium. You want to tell your friend some very important news, all right? Are you, it's very important, maybe something, even some depressing news, not very good news. Are you going to text them the bad news? Are you going to call them? Or are you going to tell them, hey, we need to meet face to face because I need to talk to you about something? Depending on which medium you pick, the message is going to be sent. Each type of medium carries special demands or attention of a particular sense. Very good. So when you're reading a book, you are using your imagination, your discrepancies, you're imagining the flow of the situation. When you're watching a book, you're still using two senses like eyes and ears, but there's less imagination because everything is just sent to you directly. Using a particular sense, again, let's use the statement in a, again, you want to call your friend because you have heard some not very good news. Again, are you going to text them or are you going to call them? What kind of sense are you going to use? Like, hey, I just heard you failed your class. What kind of emotion does it send? Versus, hey, I'm so sorry, I've heard you failed this class, are you okay? Versus calling them. Again, you can be sending, are you okay, how are you feeling, in both text and a call, but the way it is being received could be completely different. So that is pretty much what is meant by a medium is the message. The message could change depending on what medium do I pick. So McLuhan says here, media extensions are some human faculty, all right? Are extensions. Again, you're extending your imagination, you're extending your eyesight, you're extending your sense of hearing. Media, by altering the environment, again, altering the environment means that we're changing in our culture, we're changing in our society. So we're not as close to each other anymore. Again, like in Zoom, we're not in a classroom, we're not together, but we are extending our visual senses and so on. So when we're altering the environment, it evokes some ratios of sense of perceptions. So sometimes paying attention on a Zoom class might be more difficult than paying attention in actual class. Right? The extension of any one sense alters, again, the way we think, the way we act. So again, receiving some news on a text message or on a phone call or face-to-face. So when these ratios change, men change. Men here, he talks about like humanity in general, right? So one of the things that again he talks about here is, again, media, by altering the environment or like changing the environment, it evoke in us unique ratios of sense of perception. The extension of any of these senses alters, again, the way that we think and act. The thing is that you need to know about the medium is the message. It is a book called The Medium of the Message, and it's also a theory. So that's also a theory. So taking a look at McLuhan's theory, at one point, he believed that media are extensions of particular body parts or mind. Again, like we said, our sense of seeing, our sense of hearing. The other point is how Enos, again, remember Enos from Bias of Communication last class, he was focused more on the consequences of media. McLuhan here focused more on the perceptual and the psychic effects. So the medium is the message. What does he mean by the word the medium is the message? That shapes and controls the scale of form of human association and action. All right, again, your description, your imagination, your sense of seeing, your sense of hearing. It is only too typical that the content Think again, any content could be content like our class, our material. It could be content like our a movie, content like again, any kind of message that you can think of any medium blinds us to the characteristics of the medium. Like again, when you're watching a movie in the sorry, in the cinema versus watching a movie on your very small screen of a phone. Now there are two different ideas of what it means about the medium as the message. On one hand, he says that content is absolutely irrelevant. Content does not matter. What is more important here is the medium. What is more important, the technological form of the medium. So it does not matter if you're watching a horror movie or a Disney movie on Netflix, as long as they are on the same medium. Does that mean that they're gonna be the same thing? So again, you're watching a horror movie and your little brother or sister comes to watch with you. Most of the time, you're gonna tell them, no, don't watch it. It's too old for you, or it's gonna get you scary. On the other hand, the medium's nature affects both the medium's nature, again, whether it was a smartphone, laptop, computer, the medium's nature does affect the message and it affects how it received. So on the other hand, different medias could favor some messages. Again, if you're texting your friend about a death in a family versus calling them. So for example, calling them gives you that you're spending more time, you're being more cautious, you're being more emotional about the situation. So different media could favor some messages over others and affects the messages of again how they will be sent and how they will be received. Like again, when you think about it, what kind of content is it okay to say on the phone rather than in a meeting or in an email or a text message and so on. And these are two different ideas of what medium is the message could mean. Which one do you think of both was McLuhan towards? Was he towards the first definition of medium as the message, or was he towards the second definition of medium of the message? Actually, it makes sense that the second one is how the medium does affect the nature of the message. But funny enough, McLuhan actually believed the first one. He was more about how content is completely irrelevant. He was more about how technology is the technology form of the medium is here the important element when I look at a message. And that gives us a very, very important thing again, technological determinist. So again, the technological determinist is someone who is under the influence or under the not only the influence, so under the control of technology. So by understanding that McLuhan was more about the technological form, we look at McLuhan as someone who is technologically determinist. He is more about how technology controls the world, not the other way around. So McLuhan basically thought that the media form was far more important in shaping our communication than the words, images, or any other information that was conveyed through media. Now, some other, again, looks here. Now, again, one thing that you need to know, if, again, I could get you a question in the exam, according to the statement, do you think he was more determinist or instrumentalist? Means that he was more technologically determinist. Now, McLuhan wanted to take a look about, the dominance medium that we had in the past 4 classes or 3 classes, and how this dominant media changes the social organization, how it changes our society, basically. So essentially the condition of what we call the primary orality, in the oral culture, is developed in a tribal form. Remember again, remember when I had this little drawing about people living in tribes and so on? That was a form of a social organization. The people would be living together because it was, again, there was no other way to stay connected or to stay in survival. It would just make sense that we will be here in the same room or in the same area. So our total communication environment is centered around the interpersonal exchange in what we call auditory forms, in oral and sound. Again, like using music or poetry or rhythm to be able to stay in touch. People, for example, they would stay in touch through, the banging on musical instrument and so on. So this make particular demands on us physiologically, because we need to stay in the same area physically, and of course as well as psychologically, such as remembering and memorizing all of those music and sounds and music and rhythms and so on. Now, with the introduction of alphabets, right, and the phonetic writing, like again, syllabaries and so on, we adopt a different sensory bias. Now, I don't really need to, depend on my hearing, but I depend more on visuals because I read on the writing, again, like the carvings on the stones, for example. Now, we adopt a different sensory and, of course, a psychological relation to the medium that has been chosen, such as, again, writing on papyrus or carving on stones and so on. McLuhan refers to this as detribalization. It broke the first look of the tribes. It broke them. So people now are a little bit further apart because we don't need to be in the same area anymore. The traditional order breaks down and is reconstituted around new kind of relationships, new types of relationships, and of course different senses are amplified, which is your visuals. Of course, it goes a little bit more with print, and he calls it here, they tribalize the print village. We're even more and more broken, and I take a piece of newspaper with me and I travel all the way because it's easier than carrying a rock, for example. Finally, the electronic medium, he calls it the secondary orality. He goes back to the very first one. Electronic culture, he retrieves the simultaneously and acoustic sensibilities of oral culture. Again, like what we're doing right now, we're using electronic media, but we have elements of oral culture, right? Again, like sending voice notes, video calls, voice chats. So it retrieves these accountability of oral communications. He even calls it here tactile. Tactile means that it uses a lot of things. It uses all of our senses. But it still permits on literacy, which again, which looks as linear individuals, it looks as a rational, logical, detribal in many detribal. So what happens with electronic culture is that we are retribalized. We are taken back again to their tribing, and this is what we have, the global village over here. So it sets up again for different generation differences, but in other ways are conflicted in electronic culture. Which again, this takes us to what we call the global village. We are moving from all psychic structures. Electronic media is retribalizing us, and it's creating what we call a multi-sensory approach. So people everywhere across the globe could be just closely in touch together. So for our last slide over here, again, we're going to go back to the global village in a little bit. So if Enos has space and time biased media, McLuhan did his own thing and he called it hot and cool media. All right, now let's think about the first one. Hot media. Now, hot media is something that has low participation. For example, like watching a movie, you really don't need to participate in a movie. You're just taking in material, right? So what we call it has low participation. It encourages detachment. You are detaching yourself from the media. Again, you're not putting in your input. You don't need to participate, and it's very self-contained. Self-contained meaning that it already has its own definition and it has its own meaning. You don't really need to put something. So such as, again, paper, photograph, and movies, you don't really need to participate. So that is hot media. Again, low participation. On the other hand, we have cool media. Now, cool media, on the other hand, says it has high participation. It demands more engagement, something like giving a speech, for example, or in a class. We require high participation in a class. You, as a receiver, you actually need to put in, so you need to put in maybe your opinion, your critical thinking, your thoughts, and so on. The receiver needs to fill in, and cool media requires the receiver's participation. Like, for example, like hieroglyphs, ideograms, they actually require us to not only read, but to understand and interpret the work and the content that has been written. Same thing with stone, like abstract designs. Cartoon, and take a look, he says here television. So he looks at television as a cool media, apart from a movie, for example. Why does he think television is a cool media? Because he thinks that television requires us to participate and pick something. Now you have a remote control and you're scrolling through TV, you decide to pick something and you start watching it. It requires us to move our eyes, to engage in a TV show or a talk show, for example. It's a series of different content or dots that the viewer needs to shape these dots together. So let's, if again, I want to look at smartphones. Do you guys think smartphones is more about hot media or cool media, or maybe a little bit of both? So if we go to the cinema to watch a movie, do not we participate? It's not actually physically going there, but when you're watching a movie, again, you're not really filling in anything. The movie is giving you the material. The movie is giving you sound. The movie is giving you graphics. The movie is giving you conversations. It's very little when a movie asks you to fill in. Again, remember when we're talking about sender and receiver and a feedback, there is no feedback in a hot media such as a movie. There's nothing that I can give back. So it's a linear thing, again, such as, again, you are reading a book. A book will give you, most of the time, will give you all the details. You do not need to participate. You do not need to fill in. There is no way to actually give a feedback. While in a hieroglyphs, again, you cannot give actually a feedback, but you actually need to interpret and to understand and to try to break down what is actually written and what is meant by this abstract design, for example. Same thing with speech. When I'm talking right now, I require the feedback of the part of the attenders or the receivers, and so on. And we are pretty much done with electronic